Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something um, pretty personal,
Hmm.
the world of female sexual desire,
Yeah,
which is often misunderstood.
absolutely.
We have a fascinating book that we're going to be exploring
Yes.
called Glitter, Real Stories from Real Women About Sexual Desire. It's an anthology
Right.
edited by Mona Darling.
Yes, and this isn't just theory or fiction.
Hmm.
These are real women sharing their own experiences unfiltered.
Exactly. So buckle up because it gets raw and honest. And what we're hoping to do is unpack these stories together and see what they can teach us about how women experience desire, pleasure, and how societal pressures can shape those things. Think of it as like a journey through the complexities of female sexuality, with each story adding another piece to the puzzle.
I love that.
As we go through this, I'd love for you to think about what resonates with you personally, maybe a story that strikes a chord or raises questions for you.
What's so striking about this book, I think, right from the beginning, is how many of these women talk about shame and secrecy, especially in their younger years.
It's almost like a common thread woven through many of their early experiences. Take Amber, for example. She found her voice and began to explore her sexuality through writing.
Which I find so interesting, right? Using creativity
Yeah.
as a means of exploring these often hidden desires.
Yeah.
But she also talks about how hard it was to reconcile those feelings with what society deems acceptable.
Right. It's like this constant battle between personal desire and societal norms
Mhm.
that so many women seem to grapple with. Another story that really highlights this is Polly Priss's experience with age play. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar, age play is a form of BDSM
Right.
that involves role playing, where one partner takes on a younger persona.
And it often carries a lot of stigma and misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
Polly talks about the initial shame she felt and how she eventually found acceptance and a community online.
It makes you think about the importance of having those open and honest dialogues about sexuality.
Absolutely, and not just online, but in our everyday lives.
Yeah,
Breaking the silence can be incredibly liberating.
for sure.
And it's not just about finding acceptance. It's about challenging those rigid labels that society tries to impose on us.
You're so right. That brings us to Meg's story and her exploration of bisexuality. She really pushes back against those straight or gay boxes that people try to fit everyone into. It's a powerful reminder that human sexuality is often fluid and doesn't fit neatly into categories.
What's fascinating about Meg's story is how she felt caught between those societal perceptions of bisexuality,
Yeah.
not fully accepted in either heterosexual or lesbian spaces.
Almost like she was navigating two worlds, never quite finding that sense of belonging. It makes you realize how much work still needs to be done to move beyond those rigid labels and embrace the full spectrum of attraction, letting individuals define their own identities.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that these stories don't shy away from difficult topics either.
Yeah.
Several women bravely share their experiences with sexual assault
Yeah.
and the lasting impact it's had on their lives and relationships.
It's heartbreaking to read about these experiences, but also incredibly courageous of these women to share their stories. Nikiana's story, in particular, is so poignant. She speaks candidly about the complex feelings that her assault left her with, surrounding her own sexuality.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply trauma can affect someone's relationship with their own body and desires, but it also speaks to the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah, and that even in the face of such adversity, healing and reclaiming your sexuality are possible. Louisa Colt's story is another powerful example of this. She shares her own journey of healing from past trauma and how she redefined her sexuality on her own terms. It's incredibly inspiring.
And it shows that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to healing. It's a deeply personal journey, and everyone's path will be different. But what's important is that these stories are out there, giving voice to these experiences, letting other survivors know they're not alone.
Absolutely. Now, this is where things get really interesting. The book doesn't shy away from topics that are often stigmatized, like sex work, for example.
Exactly, and it challenges us to confront our own biases and preconceived notions about these often misunderstood professions.
Penny Barber is a sex worker and a mother, and she shares her experiences in a way that really defies stereotypes. She advocates for the acceptance of sex workers as parents, breaking down those societal judgments that often come with that profession.
Right.
Can you imagine the courage it takes to embrace both motherhood and sex work?
It's incredible. And it forces us to question those assumptions we often make about people whose choices might fall outside of what we consider conventional.
She talks about her decision to continue working during her pregnancy and the challenges she faced navigating those societal perceptions. It highlights the importance of empathy and understanding, even when we might not fully grasp someone else's choices. And speaking of challenging norms, the book also explores the experience of celibacy, a topic that isn't often discussed openly.
Kaylin's story offers a unique perspective on the fluctuating nature of desire. It's not always this constant, ever-present thing. Sometimes it ebbs and flows, and that's perfectly normal.
She talks about a period of unintentional celibacy in her life and how she used that time for self-discovery, gaining a deeper understanding of her own needs and desires. It's an important message, especially in a culture that often equates sexual activity with fulfillment.
And it's a reminder that we shouldn't be afraid to explore our own sexuality and figure out what works for us, even if it looks different from what society might expect.
These stories take us on so many unexpected twists and turns. Several women delve into specific kinks and fetishes, which really shows the vast spectrum of human desire.
Right.
It's all about exploration and self-acceptance.
Like Hopper James, for instance, who shares her experience with algalania, sexual interest in pain.
Yeah.
Her exploration of pain as a source of pleasure is a powerful example of how diverse human sexual experiences can be.
It definitely challenges us to broaden our understanding of what constitutes pleasure and to respect the choices of others, even if they differ from our own.
What might seem unconventional to some can be a source of deep fulfillment for others. And that's the beauty of this book. It celebrates the diversity of desire and encourages us to approach these topics with an open mind and a sense of curiosity.
So we've covered a lot of ground already, and I'm curious, what are your initial impressions of these stories? What's standing out to you so far?
Take a moment to reflect on what resonates with you personally and what sparks your curiosity. We'll be right back to continue this exploration.
These stories really make you think, don't they? They go beyond just individual desires and explore how those desires play out in relationships.
That's such a crucial point. It's about the interplay between our own desires and the dynamics we create with the people in our lives. And Glitter explores that in some really fascinating ways.
One story that really stayed with me is Taffy Davenport's experience with an older man while she was still in school. It's such a complex situation, layered with societal expectations and power dynamics.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it raises important questions about how societal norms around age and relationships can influence our choices and desires, especially when we're young and trying to figure things out.
Taffy was married at a young age and found herself drawn to this older man who seemed to offer a different kind of connection, something she felt was missing in her marriage.
Her story also touches on the emotional consequences of those choices, the guilt, the regret, the impact it had on our marriage. It's a raw and honest account of infidelity and the ripple effects it can have.
It's a reminder that even when we're seeking pleasure and connection, there can be unintended consequences. And it underscores the importance of self-awareness and open communication within relationships.
Speaking of relationships, another story that delves into those complexities is Frederica de la Fontaine's experience with BDSM and how it impacted her relationship with her husband.
That was a fascinating one. It challenges the stereotypical view of BDSM as being all about dominance and submission. Frederica actually takes control, even in scenarios that traditionally cast women in a more submissive role.
Exactly. It shows how BDSM can be a tool for empowerment and mutual pleasure, as long as there's open communication and a shared understanding between partners.
Frederica and her husband really flip the script, showing how couples can negotiate their desires and create a dynamic that works for both of them. And it makes you think, how often do we allow societal norms to dictate what's acceptable within our own relationships?
That's such an important question, and the book doesn't shy away from addressing those societal expectations head on. Another theme that emerged was the challenge of maintaining desire over time, especially in long-term relationships.
Remember Kaylin, whose story of unintentional celibacy we talked about earlier? Well, she eventually finds herself in a new relationship. But she soon discovers that even with a willing partner, keeping that initial spark alive isn't always easy.
Her experience is so relatable for many couples. That initial intensity of a new relationship can fade, and it takes work to keep the flame burning. But what's important is that Kaylin and her partner are open to trying new things, communicating their needs, and adapting to their evolving desires.
It's a testament to the effort and communication it takes to build a fulfilling and satisfying relationship over the long haul. And speaking of communication, that was a key theme woven throughout many of these stories.
Absolutely. These women emphasize the importance of honest and open dialogues about sexuality, whether it's communicating boundaries, exploring new desires, or navigating challenges within their relationships.
One story that really highlights this is Melinda's experience of using sex as a tool within her marriage. It might sound controversial, but her story offers a unique perspective on how sex can sometimes be transactional.
She talks about using sex as a way to achieve certain goals within her relationship, whether it's to conceive, to reward her husband, or even just to stop him from complaining. It raises some interesting questions about the different roles sex can play in a relationship and how those roles can evolve over time.
Melinda's story also touched on the internal conflict many women face, wanting to feel desire in a more spontaneous way, rather than just as a means to an end. It's like the struggle between the societal ideal of passionate, uninhibited desire and the reality of their own experiences.
But what's important is that Melinda is aware of this conflict and actively seeking to understand and address it. It's a step toward reclaiming her own agency and finding a path to sexual fulfillment that aligns with her authentic self.
And speaking of defying expectations, another key takeaway from Glitter is how these women challenge societal norms and embrace their individuality. We already talked about Penny Barber's experience as a sex worker and a mother, but there are so many other powerful examples.
Nikiana, who bravely shared her experience of sexual assault, also talked about her journey of sexual liberation and how she defied societal expectations of a good girl by exploring BDSM and embracing her desires.
It was such a powerful act of reclaiming her sexuality after experiencing trauma. She found empowerment in pushing back against societal norms and defining pleasure on her own terms.
Her story shows that healing and self-discovery can involve breaking free from those limitations imposed by society and forging your own path. And then there's Nina Potts, whose story takes us on an emotional roller coaster.
Nina's journey was one of self-discovery and acceptance. She challenges societal expectations by embracing her bisexuality and exploring BDSM as a way to connect with herself and others. It's a reminder that there's no right way to experience desire or pleasure.
Her story speaks to the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of finding fulfillment on your own terms, even if it means going against the grain. And ultimately, that's what these stories were all about, finding your voice, owning your choices, and celebrating the diversity of human desire.
They remind us that these experiences aren't just about sex, they're about life, about the complexities of human connection, and the search for meaning and fulfillment. What I found so refreshing was how they challenge this idea of a singular female experience. There's no one narrative here. Each story highlights the individuality of desire and how it unfolds differently for each woman.
That's what makes this collection so powerful. We see women embracing a wide range of sexual expressions, from celibacy to BDSM, from monogamy to polyamory. It's a reminder that there's no right or wrong way to be a woman or to experience sexuality.
And that's something I think we all need to hear more of, that it's okay to define pleasure and fulfillment on our own terms, without judgment or shame.
Absolutely. And these stories also challenge the notion that female sexuality is somehow passive or submissive. We see women taking control, exploring their desires, and demanding the pleasure they deserve.
Whether it's through BDSM, sex work, or simply asserting their needs within relationships, these women are actively shaping their sexual experiences. It's such a departure from that stereotypical image of women as merely recipients of male desire.
It's a welcome shift, one that empowers women to embrace their agency and redefine what it means to be a sexual being. These stories are truly rewriting the narrative around female sexuality.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these powerful stories, what do you think the key takeaways are? What really resonated with you?
What struck me most was the importance of normalizing open and honest conversations about female sexuality. We need to create spaces where women feel safe to express their desires, their fears, their questions, without judgment or shame. And we need to challenge those societal norms and expectations that limit our understanding of female sexuality.
These stories are a starting point, a glimpse into the diverse and complex world of female desire. They encourage us to listen, to learn, and to continue the conversation.
I think it's also important to acknowledge the courage it takes for these women to share their stories. They're not just talking about their own experiences. They're speaking for countless others who may not yet have found their voice.
You're absolutely right. It's a powerful reminder that even though these stories are individual, they speak to a collective experience, a shared struggle against societal norms, and a desire for authentic self-expression. So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I'd love for you to reflect on what resonated with you personally. Were there any stories that particularly struck a chord or raised questions for you?
Hold those thoughts as we explore some final reflections on glitter and what it means for our understanding of female sexuality.
It's amazing to think about the impact these stories can have, not just on individual women, but on society as a whole.
Yeah.
It's like they're cracking open the door to a more open and honest conversation about female sexuality.
It makes you wonder, like, what if these women had the power to completely rewrite the narrative around female desire?
Ooh,
What would that new narrative look like?
that's a powerful question. What stories would they tell? What would they want the world to know?
Right.
I think that's something for all of us to consider,
Yeah.
not just as we finish up this deep dive, but as we continue to explore and understand our own sexuality and the experiences of others.
I think one of the most important messages they'd want to convey is that female sexuality is just as diverse and complex as male sexuality. It's not this monolithic thing that can be easily defined or categorized.
Exactly. These stories show us that there's a whole spectrum of desire, a tapestry of experiences that defies simple labels and expectations.
And they'd want to dismantle those harmful stereotypes that have been perpetuated for far too long. The idea that women are somehow less sexual than men, or that their desire should be controlled or suppressed.
You want to reclaim that agency and celebrate the power of female desire in all its forms.
And I think they'd also want to emphasize the importance of consent and respect in all sexual encounters.
That's crucial.
Yeah.
These stories remind us that healthy sexuality is built on a foundation of mutual understanding, communication, and respect for boundaries.
They'd want to create a world where women feel empowered to explore their desires safely and without judgment.
And where those desires are not only acknowledged, but celebrated as a natural and integral part of being human.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Glitter, real stories from real women about sexual desire, I want to encourage you to continue exploring these themes, to keep asking questions, and to engage in those open and honest conversations about sexuality that we've been talking about.
This book is just a starting point. There's a whole world of knowledge and experiences out there waiting to be discovered.
And I have a feeling these stories will stay with you long after you finish the last page, prompting you to reflect on your own journey and the narratives that have shaped your understanding of sexuality.
Oh, I highly recommend seeking out the full book. It's a powerful read, and I think it has the potential to spark some really important conversations.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring these complex and fascinating stories with you.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those conversations going.